Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast welcomes J.J. Sefton, the publisher of The Morning Report, author of the new book, The End of America, 100 Days That Shook the World. And J.J., welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start out with this because I think it's fundamental to the conversation, what America means. I think we've lost it culturally, but it means something around the world, and it means something to the patriots who still exist.
Yeah, it does. It is, well, I mean, we all grew up thinking and believing and knowing, just learning these things in schools, that it was the last best hope for freedom and liberty around the world. It was an inspiration for people all over the world to try to come here and to live just unmolested and to live to the greatest potential that God gave them as they were born with. I mean, my mother and was a survivor of the Shoah and survived a death camp and 2 death marches, and miraculously came here and kissed the ground that she walked on and thanked her lucky stars every day for being here. And so we have lost that. And it's, you know, it was slowly, as the saying goes, then all at once that it happened. And we find ourselves in this predicament where, as I put forth in the book, that America as we have known it is indeed, the expression goes, suddenly, then all at once. And America as we have known it or had hoped it would be is gone forever. And what we're experiencing now is some sort of literally a dystopian nightmare that we never thought in our wildest imaginings would happen.
So this is fascinating to me because the title of the book, The End of America, and I agree with you, and I've been observing this for some time, but how do we grasp that? I mean, a lot of people are just going about their daily business and thinking, well, this is the new normal, or the government's taking care of me, so I've got no worries. But it goes far beyond that, doesn't it?
I kind of liken it to the movie The Sixth Sense, and forgive the spoiler alert for those who haven't seen the movie. It's like, you know, we're sort of Bruce Willis is walking around, you know, and he's trying to open the door, and he can't understand for the life of him why the heck he can't open the door and get out. We sort of are going through these motions of sort of regular order. Well, we see there's an election happening and the usual election politicking and things are going on. And yeah, I'm still getting my check. I'm still sort of working, despite the fact that we've been in a 2-week lockdown that's now going on almost 96 weeks already. But still things seem kind of normal. So there's that. And there's also this perception in most people that you just can't accept the fact that these things are happening to you. And look all around it. You know, we have, as I call it, the Garland archipelago, where Merrick Garland is locking up political dissidents, not just for January 6th, but for speaking out at school board meetings. And so these things are not normal. This is way beyond not normal, and we are heading down a very dangerous path. So you have to be sort of blind or just really not aware of what's going on to not see this. But I think as things get markedly worse, especially economically, people are going to wake up to it.
JJ, let's talk about the election, going back to how things looked leading up to November 3rd, because all indications were positive, at least for people who love the country.
It is unbelievable that just even with the lockdowns and everything, Donald Trump was drawing mass rallies, and sometimes 3, 4, 5 times a week in cities all across the country, and people were coming out in droves to support him. And Joe Biden was basically chained to a radiator in Delaware, and he had these little staged events where they had a dozen people, and most of them were reporters coming out. And I think he had the automobile parade with 3 cars, and Jill and Joe were waving at them, and they disappeared. So it just made no sense. I mean, even with all the lockdowns and the suffering that was going on, people knew they wanted Trump back. Everything, we had to get back to a normal.
So we had that, and then all of a sudden that evening, as we were looking at the numbers coming in, and you chronicle all of this, there were substantial leads in these key states. I mean, very substantial leads. And then what happened?
By 9 o'clock that night, I mean, all the indications were, I mean, he was literally running away with it. He was about to take Georgia, and the South looked solid red, and then the next thing, he was about to sweep through the upper Midwest, and then all of a sudden there was an overflowing toilet somewhere in Atlanta, and it managed to flood out 4 cities and 6 states. And then, the observers were kicked out, and the counting stopped, and the windows were taped over. And by the next morning, oh, voila, Joe Biden was ahead by whatever it was, thousands of votes in each area. And it made zero sense. This had never happened before. We have never stopped an election count, let alone in 6 states, anywhere. This is just unprecedented. And right then and there, if you just don't even look at any of the other evidence, and whether it's circumstantial, whether it's anecdotal, whether it's the real thing of counts, if you just looked at that right there, at the very least, something was really rotten.
So it was obvious, and yet people like you and me and others who were talking about this publicly were told we were conspiracy theorists, that we're insurrectionists, that we're causing problems where none exist, and really just to go home and shut up. How did we get to this point?
Part of the blame lies unfortunately, with the Republican Party, which to me, at this point, with very few exceptions, is a wing of the Democratic Party. They're there just to provide them cover. I think Rush Limbaugh, may he rest in peace, or somebody made the analogy, it was like the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals, and the Republicans' job was just to lose and just to sort of lick their wounds, and that was it. But it's more serious than that. You had state legislatures that were solidly Republican that saw this going on, especially in Pennsylvania, that could have put a stop to this and should have put a stop to this by not certifying their electoral votes, and instead they went along with the steal. And they said, and they passed the buck to the courts. And then the courts sat on their hands and didn't want to hear the cases brought by the Trump legal team. And then finally, on January 6th, when Mike Pence had the opportunity to stop this and not certify the vote, he certified the vote. And so that was it. So it couldn't have happened without the malice aforethought before and after the fact of the Republican Party.
I think a lot of people are scratching their heads because they don't understand. When you say that the Republican Party was essentially complicit here, they're wondering, what is the motivation? I always thought the Republicans were opposing the Democrats, they would say. So how do you answer that?
It's, all these things, and this is really because of Trump. His greatest accomplishment, aside from the economy, aside from the incredible foreign policy accomplishments, historic, all these things, his greatest triumph, I think, was it was his Achilles heel, because he was suckered by a lot of people in D.C. He exposed the fact that we've been living a lie for, if not certainly the last 10 years, then maybe since the post-war era, where you seem to have this opposition, but it's not an opposition. And essentially we have this globalist enterprise that seeks to sort of cut us down to size and make us part of some sort of quote-unquote new world order where the UN or the Chinese or whoever is running the show, and we're going to be put in our place. So there is no real opposition. It's always, so Democrats, Margaret Thatcher, and I'm sort of going off on tangents and firing on all cylinders here, she described it as a ratcheting effect, and the ratchet is always going to the left, and it never loosens, it never goes the other way. So as the Democrats go pell-mell to race us over a cliff, if you ever have a Republican president or administration, they'll go in the same direction. They just go at a slower speed. So they just think it's never about what's going on. Socialism or the Democrat liberal policies are never wrong. It's just that the GOP fancies itself as better managers. So it's like, they'll do a tax cut here, a rate cut here, but at the end of the game, government is always growing, always becoming more powerful, always encroaching on our freedoms and your wealth. And that's just the end of that's the be all and end all of it. So there is no opposition. And I think Trump's candidacy and his presidency exposed that.
Let's talk about a couple of the interventions that took place here, and if they were actual helpful interventions or if these were plants or something else. The first one I want to talk about is Sidney Powell, who got a lot of national attention and then was sued and then all of a sudden just kind of went away.
It really is kind of hard to read that. I'm not going to cast aspersions on anyone's motivations. I think she truly, I don't know what this Kraken thing was all about. If she had it, why wasn't it exposed? I don't know what was going on. But I just think that there was a lot of pressure put on her, whether with lawsuits or with countersuits or with who knows what was going on. I just don't think at the end of the day, it was never going to fly. I think there was just a lot of, it's hard to say. I'm sort of at a loss for words about it because, it should have been there and it wasn't there. And if it was there, it was poo-pooed. It was not allowed. It was disavowed. And at the end of the day, somebody I think got to her and she just, that was it. She just clammed up. That sounds kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but I can't explain why the evidence that she had, A, wasn't presented, or B, if it was presented, never got a fair hearing in a court of law. So I don't think it was presented. I think partially she was afraid of being sued by Dominion, as were a lot of people.
Let's go then to Mike Lindell, who spent what looks like a lot of money and time in putting together kind of a couple of slick productions. But I talked to some people who thought he was working at cross purposes with what they were actually trying to expose. What's your take on Mike Lindell's presentations?
I think everybody had good intentions.
Yes.
Because I don't have any proof that there was, especially in that inner circle, that someone was trying to sabotage the effort. I think it was a lost cause from the get-go, but there was no coordination. There probably were a lot of egos involved, between Rudy Giuliani, who is, he has a very strong ego. Having been a lifelong New Yorker and lived through his administration, he's great and he's bad at the same time, and he wants the limelight and the spotlight. So I think maybe there was a lot of tension going on between the two of them, and sort of one-upmanship with each other as who was going to be the savior and the champion here. And while all that was going on, they were sort of sinking. The boat was sinking, and everybody was trying to hog the spotlight. And so there was probably a lot of backstabbing going on backstage. But it's you don't have a front seat to it, so I'm only guesstimating or speculating as to what the motivations are of individual players here. So the whole thing was a complete, it was a cluster F from the beginning, so to speak. And then plus you had the long knives are out to get them from within the GOP itself, and certainly from the Democrats and the deep state itself. So it was kind of a lost cause, and looking back on it.
You earlier referenced the courts and kicking all of these cases out. The left has used this to say that all of these claims are illegitimate because look at how many courts, and they go on to list the number, whatever it is, have rejected these claims. Is it true that we have no honest judges left? Were the claims not presented properly? What happened there?
It's not that the claims weren't presented properly. Part of it was, it's such an explosive case, number one. I mean, who wants to be the guy holding the bag saying that, it looks like you're right, and we're going to, at the very least, we're going to hold a new election, or we're going to disqualify Joe Biden. If you saw what happened, as we all did last summer all over the country, and what could possibly happen in Kenosha in the next day or so, it looks like nothing compared to what would have happened had that eventuality happened. It would have really torn us apart completely. So I don't think that part of it is I don't think anybody wanted to be the one holding the bag. I think they wanted to just kind of pass the buck, and finally the buck stopped nowhere. The other thing is I do think we do have a fairly corrupted judiciary. If you look at the actions especially of people like John Roberts with Obamacare and so on and so forth, it's from top down. And then the judge, I think it's Schneider over here in Kenosha, who is, I can't understand why he's just not throwing this case out. Partially it's fear, and partially it's because many of these people are part of the globalist enterprise to be the rubber stamp that moves things forward and destroys the Constitution. So it's this toxic mix of ideology plus fear.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues in just a moment with JJ Sefton.
Support this podcast online at schillingshow.com.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories, and in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. Border Hawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Charlottesville's community watchdog, Rob Schilling.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast returns. We're talking with J.J. Sefton. The book is The End of America, 100 Days That Shook the World. And I want to go right to January 6th. This has been probably the most maligned incident in recent history, unrightfully so, by the media and by many popular pundits. What was the purpose of the January 6th gathering?
Well, the gathering itself, I mean, it's what it evolved into was a Reichstag fire, and it probably was that, from the get-go. But from our perspective, from thousands, tens of thousands of ordinary Americans, they just wanted to show, and for one last desperate attempt to say, please, please, please do not let this travesty, this abomination go forward and not certify this election. And that was a legitimate thing. It was a legitimate people airing their grievances to their elected officials in a rally that was if at the most it was vociferous. It was intended as a peaceful rally, and from the perspective of the people who attended there in good faith and the president himself, it was a peaceful rally.
Let's talk about how the trouble started and if
Sure.
there were embedded operators there, which has been discussed a lot, but I think, again, the general public doesn't believe that.
No, it is now without any shadow of a doubt that there was some sort of a collusion, whether it was with the Democrat Party, with the leadership of that party, but certainly with the D.C. police, the Capitol Police, and the FBI and other agents, and then Antifa and BLM. The doors were opened, and these agitators were let in. They were dressed up in MAGA hats and MAGA gear and all this kind of stuff, and they were creating all sorts of chaos. And look, unfortunately, a number of people followed them in. But the thing is, when they followed them in, what did they do? They kind of looked at the drapery, took a few selfies. One guy had the temerity to sit in Nancy Pelosi's sacred chair and write a few, snarky Post-it notes to her. And that was it. Unfortunately, a woman named Ashley Babbitt was shot in the back by Michael Byrd, a police officer. She was assassinated. And then all of a sudden it was, all hell. It's craziness. The violence and all of this was perpetrated against our side. And all the perpetrators were basically, agents of the deep state. This was a complete and total setup to be used as a pretext to crack down on any political opposition. And there it is. It was supposed to be a riot. It was supposed to be an insurrection. It was labeled by like Adam Schiff and Pelosi as the greatest crime since since the Civil War, Pearl Harbor, and the Holocaust combined. And they always label it as we have to preserve our quote-unquote precious democracy. And every time I hear that, I want to just throw up when I hear that. But these people instigated this riot. The rioting was done by agents of this government. I'm convinced of that beyond any reasonable doubt. I mean, the guy who was, I don't know his name, the guy who was dressed up kind of crazy with the shaman with the headgear, he was just sentenced to 41 months in prison for basically just showing up, just for being there. There are people, like dozens of people. The great Julie Kelly, a real journalist over at American Greatness, has been on this case for almost a year now, where we have dozens, scores of people behind bars, literally still waiting trial, not even charged, in abominable and appalling conditions. This literally is, as I said, the Garland Archipelago, with all the hat tip to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. We have political prisoners now for doing nothing but trespassing. Meanwhile, Antifa and BLM, for the entire summer, literally turned scores of American cities into Dresden and got a slap on the wrist. And that's it. It's crazy. It's topsy-turvy world.
So, JJ, this is part of the end of America, is that we don't have equal justice under the law. And we've seen it here in Charlottesville, where you have leftist so-called activists who get charged with serious crimes. They get a slap on the wrist and let go. And then you have some conservatives doing something that maybe is along the same lines. Those people get sent to jail. We cannot survive with a justice system that is unjust.
Absolutely not. It's beyond that. We've now got into a stage where the FBI has done this for years. I mean, look at Robert Mueller and I think it was Andrew Weissman. These two guys, I think, were both in bed with Whitey Bulger. Known, in the Boston mob, and literally they sent 2 or 3 informants who were rotting in prison because they had to protect Whitey Bulger, and Whitey Bulger was out on the street whacking people left and right in Boston. That was part of it. So they're fabricating evidence. They're fabricating these cases. Look at the case with Gretchen Whitmer up in Michigan. Supposedly there was this white supremacist insurrectionist plot to oust her or to kill her or something like that. And it turns out it was all concocted by the FBI. And a couple of stupid rubes basically went along with it and said, "Yeah, we'd like to see her go," or something like that. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, it's the greatest threat, to our freedom since whatever. And they're literally manufacturing cases and putting people away. And so it's not even, you could sort of excuse it, and some people excuse it, well, it's a sting operation. It's not a sting operation. They're literally fabricating these cases, and the main perpetrators of the cases are actual FBI agents or FBI informants themselves. And it's some poor rube who gets caught up in it and is not even doing anything, but just as an innocent passerby, all of a sudden they're trotted out as terrorists and they get the book thrown at them. It's horrendous. So yes, this is part and parcel of a corrupt justice system that is now spying on parents in Loudoun County, Virginia, because they object to, this crackpot race theory, which is what I call Jive Kemp, or they're protesting boys in skirts being allowed in bathrooms to rape their daughters. And all of a sudden, we're supposed to be the terrorists. We're the white supremacists, and all this is going on. It is upside down. And so the justice, and look what happened in 2016. The entire Justice Department and the intelligence apparatus of the United States was weaponized and used to try to sabotage Donald Trump's campaign, and then for the next whole year just to bring him down, which they ultimately succeeded in 2020. It's absolutely, this is not America.
I want to go to the media complicity in all of this, and also just a couple of specific examples. The reported deaths of police officers, in particular one officer who was reported to have been killed by a fire extinguisher. The whole story was eventually debunked, but that was in everyone's mind. This actually happened.
Brian Sicknick. I mean, and his corpse was laid out in the Capitol Rotunda as the victim of some sort of, evil white supremacist, terrorist, insurrectionist, whatever you want to call it. It's funny, all these words they throw out. It's it sounds like, these tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, and they used to sort of laugh at people who cried communist everywhere in their soup since Tail Gunner Joe, and it's crazy. But yeah, the guy died of, I think, a heart attack. Nobody ever hurled a fire extinguisher at him, but of course, when a lie goes around the world 2 times before the truth gets its pants on, and forget it. It's now the truth. There it is.
Yeah, there was also another one that took place on that evening of January 6th. I was watching the breathless female news anchor from one of the major networks, I think it might have been CBS, coming on and telling about a plot to kidnap and assassinate Mike Pence. And that was the lead story. And again, I think people hear that once and they think, well, that's what happened.
There is this perception, and it's probably going to be there forever, or at least maybe it's fading away. Who knows? As consecutive generations grow up with alternate forms of media, but the media was always looked upon as, Walter Cronkite was the voice of truth, and you only had, when you had 3 networks and 2 newspapers and a handful of radio stations, there was no alternate media, and so they crafted the narrative of what you were going to hear and what you were not going to hear, even more crucially. And so when they say something, people see this, they see the CBS I, they see the NBC Peacock or whatever it is, the M, and they think, oh yeah, that's the truth. And it's not the truth. It's abject lies. And now all of a sudden they're openly boasting about, I think it was Dan Rather or whoever was saying, yes, we have to now craft the truth. The truth can't, we have to lie about things, or it's because we have to get rid of Donald Trump, let's say, or whatever it might be. So they're openly boasting about this. And no wonder, the ratings are in the toilet because of alternate sources of media and because they are lying to people, and people can't stand it anymore. It's not even that they even have a veneer of impartiality. The news anchors are now basically openly partisan and propagandist. So it's a turnoff. At least it should be a turnoff to most people. But as you say, when something gets out there and it's sort of put out there as the truth, there's no way to counter it. Or when you try to counter it, you're silenced. What's happening with all the doctors coming forward trying to talk about the dangers of these vaccines, whether you believe in the coronavirus vaccines or not, when they try to bring up alternate stories or alternate facts, not alternate facts, but the facts as they see them with alternate treatments like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and Regeneron and all these things, which are cheap, available, and proven safe and effective, they're silenced. Same thing with people trying to bring up the stories about children, critical race theory or transgenderism, or you name it. They are silenced and they will not be allowed to speak. It's not about even having a playing field. It's about clearing the playing field. It's about silencing all opposition. So there it is. All of a sudden, Brian Sicknick was murdered by a crazy white supremacist with a fire extinguisher, and it's out there. So try to combat it.
I'd like to talk finally about a couple of elements of destruction of the Biden administration, and I love the term you used for them in the book, a criminal junta, which pretty much says it all. So I want to start with cultural destruction, because that is the kind of underpinning of the country, and if we destroy the culture, we have nothing left.
This is, as we were talking about, especially with education, and I've been kind of screaming about this for a long, long time. Even if we had a slew of Donald Trumps or whoever, or Marjorie Taylor Greenes, or you name or Ron DeSantis's from top to bottom, from president to dog catcher, it's not going to mean anything unless children grow up understanding what's right and what is wrong, what's real history and what is propaganda. And so this is really the bottom line of it. And I think Steve Bannon was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, saying it's hard to really have faith in elections anymore. How do I tell people that, well, you got to go out there and vote? Well, why should I vote if the thing is rigged? It's important to go out, especially at the lower levels, which is the community boards and the school boards, and this is really where the front lines are, and where the front lines will be going forward, because we can't have another generation of our children whose minds are either completely numbed or poisoned, or who are just taught absolute garbage. We will be lost as a society. It's over at that point. So that's important. That's the rod. So that's why critical race theory is being defended. First, it's funny. First, they deny they teach it, like Terry McAuliffe has been denying it, and then they say, "Well, if you oppose it, you're a racist." So it's, well, which is it? But that's that's the hypocrisy of the left, which is a redundancy. But that's what it's all about. So there is this rot that's going on, and it's going on in our schools, and it's intentional, and it's been going on for a long time. At least 2 to 3 generations of American children have been steeped in ever-increasing poisonous propaganda that is anti-God, anti-America, the free market system, anti-freedom, anti-free speech, and you name it, anti-West. And so we look around, and the theme of slowly then all at once. Well, here we are. It's all at once. You look at a company, or you look at a logo like Coca-Cola, or you look at General Electric, or you look at Chase Manhattan Bank, and you think, oh my God, stalwarts of capitalism and pillars of the free market and business in America. And look who's inhabiting the C-suites. It's people who have been steeped in critical race theory and in all of this propaganda, who are now running the companies. Joe Biden doesn't necessarily even need a DOJ or a weaponized police or law enforcement agencies to inflict to oppress people. The business will do it for us. It's the ultimate method of oppression is when businesses do these things. Then the government says, well, we can't do anything. It's a business decision. It's the free market, and that's so Orwellian. It's unbelievable. It's the German Stasi of old would look at this and marvel at it and say, my God, if only we had this, we'd still be around. But that's the problem, and that all stems back to education. I think. You have the millennials, and I don't like to disparage any generations who have gone along with this. And of course, our generation, my generation, which is the baby boomers, have gone along with this lock, stock, and barrel. But it seems that the latest generation of kids are sort of waking up to this and saying, this is garbage. We don't buy it. We're not buying it. So maybe our salvation is hopefully around the corner, but we do have to take the bull by the by the horns, so to speak. I was about to say another word, but get involved in the schools, get involved in your kids' education. If you see that you can't get ahead, then pull your kids out of the schools and educate them yourself before they outlaw that.
It's where we're heading. JJ, if people would like to follow you online, or if they'd like to get a copy of your book, The End of America, 100 Days That Shook the World, tell us how, please.
First of all, you can get it on Amazon. It's also available direct from the publisher, which is Calamo Press, Calamo Press. And if you want to follow me, I would be honored. I'm at the Ace of Spades headquarters, which is www.ace.mu.nu, or my own site, which is cutjibnewsletter.com.
It's a very important book, and we all need to be aware of what's going on around us. JJ Sefton, thank you for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Rob, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at schillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.